So by now you're probably asking yourself, what the heck? We're working in 3D, but this text is always completely flat. No matter what you do in these scenes, we've got text that is a 2D plane in 3D space. Can't you have extruded text that really is 3D so that when you move around it with a camera, it has thickness to it that doesn't change like it would with the extrude filter? So the answer is there is a way around it. But first, you need to understand that the way 3D works in motion and other applications that are similar, like After Effects, is essentially you're working with 2D planes in 3D space. Something that Trish and Chris Myers calls playing cards in space, which I love that analogy, the idea of that every layer is like a playing card and you can throw them around in 3D space, change their rotation position in 3D space, but they're all flat. And that's essentially the case with motion as well, but there's a few things you can do to deal with that. So one thing that we're going to do here is show how we can get 3D extruded text. And the way we're going to do that is basically building up a bunch of layers by using a replicator. So check this out. We're going to select the text, and then I'm going to make a replicator. And to see how this works, I'm going to turn off the light. I'm going to turn off the floor, so we just see our text. I'm going to use the button in the toolbar here to make a replicator, or the keyboard shortcut L. And by default, it kind of makes this grid, this 5x5 grid that we've seen earlier. What I'm going to do in the inspector is change the shape from a rectangle to a line. And then I really want the line to be the same start and end point. So I'm going to set X to be 0 for the start and for the end. So now we've got these 5 points all right on top of each other. They're not any different at all. They're stacked right on top of each other. But what I'm going to do for the end point, I'm going to click this disclosure triangle, and we only have X and Y. But like, wait a minute, we need Z. We want to do this in Z space. So check it out. There's a little 3D checkbox down here. So I'll enable 3D. As soon as I do, we get X, Y, and Z. So now for the end point, if I drag back, I am creating thickness to this text. Maybe you'll just do about that much. Okay? Now, by default, it doesn't look very good because that's only 5 copies. So what you have to do is really increase the number of copies. Before I do, one thing that can help make this look a little better is to add an outline to the text. So I'm going to select the source text. I'm going to go to the style pane of the text inspector, turn on the outline, make sure it's filled with color, give a darker color and a little bit of width just so we can see better exactly what's going on here. There, now we have a good sense of what's happening. I'll return to the replicator inspector, to the number of points, which is 5, and I'm just going to crank this way up until we get what looks like full thickness. Now, the more copies you add, the more it's going to affect performance. So you don't want to do too much if you can get away with it. So this is a trade-off between the number of copies that'll really make thickness appear, real and not show any gaps versus getting decent playback performance. So I'm going to go a little higher. Let's try about 50. There we go. So now I have something that looks like it has real thickness. If I turn off the outline, let's select the text and turn off the outline, we can see the thickness there as well, but it's a little more obvious with the outline. Now there is some moire pattern that goes on here as we rotate, and sometimes you can get rid of it by changing the render quality to best. But in this case, we're still going to have a little moire there. So I'm going to go back to normal. And I'm going to put everything else back on. I'll turn our floor back on. I'll turn a light back on. And now this will take a minute to calculate. You can see there. But now we have 3D text that has extrusion to it. Because it's black, it's very dark. So now that we're in this view, I'll change that blue from a blue to something a little bit lighter in color. So it's not quite so dark. Or I'll try turning it off completely. There we go. That looks good. Now it looks like it has some decent shading to it. Now you'll notice if I try to orbit, it's going to take a little while to update. It doesn't update right away because it's got to calculate those 50 different layers and all the interaction of the shadows. And if I go too far on the edge, we'll start to see through the multiple layers at one point. But the key here is if you don't add too much angle to the camera going right off the edge, you can create a nice short camera move and really get a feel for having 3D extruded text. in motion. So that's one way to accomplish having true depth to text in a 3D scene.